change curve, the V impact on related productivity and or attitude, which usually accompanies or follows the implementation of a change. What is the one of the primary takeaways from this model from the standpoint of what the manager should be aware of and doing in the process of implementing change?
Upward pressures.
Bill's got it. Yes, applying up pressures to counteract those down pressures that are a natural part of the change curve. Okay? Slot machine management is generally not a good approach to change management. We talked about people resist change. Why are there 2 question marks after people resist change? What do those represent? Well, first of all, we say that people resist change is a truism. It's a truism. It's a statement that we generally accept as true, but it really is not entirely true because it needs to be quantified, or qualified, I should say. The idea is that people actually resist some change and they resist being changed. And this model sort of introduces the concept of personality change and the fact that by and large, managers are not people changers. We acknowledge that people generally do not change their core identity, who they are. Now, we have obviously some beliefs in our faith that can happen and does happen through salvation and transformation. So that's true only to an extent, but generally speaking, people don't change. When someone has pressure applied to them, generally speaking, depending on what's in their denominator, they're going to react in a way that may or may not be very good, very helpful. So you don't want to apply pressure. Instead, we want to apply the north wind theory to change methods. And that does what? What's the key phrase, the Model-netics catchphrase for the north wind theory? Creating a desire for change. Yes, so the idea here is that the Fordian hydraulic is a pushing action. The north wind theory is a pulling action. We want to pull people into the change, not push them or force them into the change. And we do that by creating a desire for the change. So the 4 steps in the recruiting process are picture, locate, compare, and 4, sell. Picture, locate, compare, and sell. The profile, the position profile. So we have not just a job description, but we have a position profile. The idea there is that the position profile describes the ideal candidate for this position. It doesn't really deal with the function of that position. That's the job description. Or it doesn't deal with the tasks or the things that the job involves. It pictures and represents and describes the ideal candidate for that position. One of the key phrases that we want to apply to locate is to cast a wide net. When we talk about compare, what do we want to first compare? Once we have a candidate or a list of candidates or viable candidates that we've boiled down to a certain reasonable number, what do we first compare them to? A little more specific and in Model-netics terms. We compare them to the picture that we've drawn for the ideal candidate, right? So you want to compare them first to the picture of the ideal candidate. And only once we've done that do we then start comparing them to what? Other candidates, right. So that is a legitimate part of the recruiting process. Is to try to sell the position. Now, one of the things that we do in that process here at Brentwood that I think many churches don't do is as part of selling that job, the first phone conversation that we have with a candidate that we may have solicited or that we have narrowed down from submissions is we have a phone conversation where we do all the talking. We don't ask them any questions yet about themselves. We share with them about our church, about our culture, about our organization, about our values, our mission, our vision, and all of that. That's part of the selling process. And that may result in that candidate who wasn't previously interested in the job becoming interested in it, but what else might it do?
Let them know if they're a good fit there.
Yeah, they might allow them to eliminate themselves as a candidate. They may decide whether they applied for it or whether we solicited them. Going through that process may allow them to say, you know, this just doesn't sound right for me for a number of reasons. It's that the performance of someone exhibits in a particular job is not just based on them alone. It's based sometimes on other factors that are out of their control. So we have this concept of no success, no failure. If there's success in that job, we can't say that that's just about that person. We have to look at the other factors that are involved in that success. There's also no failure. The no failure concept is if there is a performance problem. Model-netics uses the term substandard performance, and we'll deal with some models dealing with substandard performance later. But when there is substandard performance, you can't always just blame it on that person or say to that person, it's all your fault. We might not be in a workable situation here. We might have to make a change, but you can really soften the situation by saying, hey, we realize it's not you. It's this situation here, or it's the people that you're working with, and we realize there's just not the right arrangement here. The yardstick is the person who fits the picture. We go back to that picture. They fit the picture. Again, if we've done our job in creating and drawing the picture for that position, the ideal candidate, then the yardstick, the person who's going to be defined as the yardstick, is going to be the person that best fits that picture. Could that be a best operator? Maybe. Could it be an obvious choice or an invisible person? Yeah. Any one of those could be the yardstick. But the point is that we first establish what the picture is and then apply these individual candidates to that picture and then determine that they are not just because they are the best operator or because they're the obvious choice or because they're an outside person do we use that as the primary criteria. Then we talked about the evaluation fusion triangle, 3 bases used for evaluating people, traits, activities, and results. And why do we not use just one of these in our evaluation of individuals? Yeah, so with respect to activities, they might be the wrong activities. They might not be producing any results. You know, you can be busy, but without doing the right things.
Traits don't equal results.
Traits do not equal results. They're important contributors to results in some cases. You know, you want to be sure that the right makeup of the person is in the right job, but they don't necessarily guarantee results. Then why would we not say that results are the only criteria for evaluation? They might be getting the results in a nefarious way or in a way that's unethical or in a way that's just not healthy or whatever it might be. So you can't look at any one of these in isolation. They have to all 3 be considered. That's why it's a fusion triangle. The indispensable person, the person in the organization cannot afford to lose. And this is sort of a paradoxical kind of a concept here, because what is it that Peter Drucker said we should do with indispensable people in the organizations? Fire them, that's right. Why would we say that we need to fire an indispensable person? And that's a hyperbole, obviously, but why would we need to do that? Because you depend on them too much. It's not a healthy situation for the individual. It's not a healthy situation for the organization. It's not healthy for the individual because they can eventually begin to feel taken advantage of. They can feel overworked and underpaid, that sort of thing. It's unhealthy for the organization because why? Because if that person is lost to the organization, which we're going to deal with today in the Mack truck theory, then you don't have, then you've lost productivity, until that productivity or that person can be replaced. And if they're an indispensable person, you're not going to likely immediately replace them with someone who can do all those things that the indispensable person did. And then we finished up with the compensation fusion triangle, 3 factors which must be considered in developing a compensation program: internal equitability, external equitability, and job performance. And I kind of made the point, I sort of used our own compensation system here at Brentwood to unpack this model, where we say internal equitability, we look at comparable pay for comparable jobs within the organization, even across all subunits of the organization. We do that by having the different position job grades, M's, P's, A's, 1s, 2, 3, 4. So that's how we look at internal equitability. External equitability is done by surveys and analysis and memberships in salary survey resources and things like that, where we regularly assess whether we're compensating these different positions commensurate with what's out in the marketplace. And that number, that survey, that information ends up creating a reference rate for each of these particular positions. And then that reference rate becomes the basis for the hiring of people into those jobs. And we hire them either above or below the reference rate, depending on their level of experience, what they bring to the job, all those 3 R's that we talked about in in the compensation scale. And then when it comes time for performance evaluations and raises for the following years, we use a grid where we combine their job performance, which of course is represented what? By the evaluation fusion triangle, traits, activities, and results. We deal with all three of those in the job performance part of the compensation fusion triangle, and then we assign a percentage to their performance evaluation, and then that is put into this grid where the position that they have within the reference rate or respective to the reference rate then determines what the increase will be for the following year. And that's a little bit of a sliding scale as well, because as I said last week, that helps keep things sort of fair and equitable across the organization. If we just added the same percentages to all the positions, then there's going to be this ever-growing gap between the higher paid positions and the lower paid positions. So this is a reference point that kind of keeps things equitable as time moves on and as the years pass. Okay? Span of control refers to A's ability to supervise the work of others. And the larger that A's wedge becomes, the smaller the span of control they can have. And that translates literally to the number of direct reports that they can have, right? So the more that A delegates, the smaller that A's piece of the pie is, theoretically, the more B's that A can then supervise, right? Because A has to spend his time doing something. So he's either spending his time doing his own work or he's spending his time managing the work of the others. And the more time he's spending doing his own work, the less time he has to manage the work of the others. We flip the triangle so that over time, then you have only the 10% is now in the check, do, report category. There's still going to be some things in the do, report category because the delegation process never completely isolates the manager-subordinate relationship. But ideally, most of what that employee is now doing is simply in the do category. If there's been effective definition to delegate, define to delegate, then the goal is that person then understands and knows what they're there to do, and they simply do it. And there's not the expectation to report. The overload situation, when individuals cannot properly discharge their duties in the time available. And then finally, plan for growth. So despite the fact that I said we add more campuses, that creates more work for a lot of our staff, something else that we've done effectively is that we have planned for that growth. So when we get ready to launch a new campus, we have a baseline by which we say we're not going to launch a new campus until we're ready to adequately staff that campus with a pastor and whatever other staff members we feel like in that particular context are necessary in order for that campus to launch successfully. We don't launch a new campus until we have the financial resources in place to have a place for them to meet and to source their ministries and things like that. So we plan well for growth. Okay? To apply this to church life, one of the things we might take into account is, and interesting, ironically enough right now that I've used this model or this example in the past, is our relationship with Laughlin Baptist Church before we merged with Laughlin and they became a regional campus. When we first started the conversations, the present position with them, we actually said there may be, I think we had 4 different potential alternatives that were defined. One was to become a regional campus. Another one was to just have a church revitalization relationship with them where we walked alongside them for a while and help them get healthy again and get back on their feet. Another opportunity was for it to become a church plant where maybe the church was going to be redefined and a pastor would be called, but it wouldn't be one of our regional campuses. It would just be something that we applied our church planting model to, which included some financial support over a certain period of time. And so there were 3 or 4 different objectives that could have played out. And as we walked through these steps and created the action plan, it was determined that becoming a regional campus was the viable objective, and so that's what happened. Why would we not plan and budget with 100%? If we say that we want to be good stewards of resources and we want to maximize everything that we do for the reaching of our objectives, why would we not include or plan 100% must-do activity? Why would we not only do what is required to meet our objectives? The answer that we give to that, and I think those are good answers, is that if you only plan must-do activities, let's say, for example, you only budget 100% must-do activities, during peak loading times or during times of a crisis, you've got no margin. You've got no margin to cut back. In 2008, during the economic downturn, and at that time, our budget, does anybody know what our budget is today in 2020? Just as a good little trivia question for being on the church staff. Do you know what our operating budget is in 2020?
26.7.
I thought it was a flat 27 million.
That was on that brochure, 27.
Yeah, 27 million, okay? In 2008, it was around $12 million, 12 or 13 million if I recall. We cut $1 million out of our budget that year, mid-year, meaning we've got to find $1 million that we don't spend in the middle of this year in order to guard against this economic downturn and lower gifts, lower offerings and gifts coming in, that sort of thing. If we had only if we only budgeted things that we had to do to keep the church running, then we would have been making cuts that were very painful, right? We would have been cutting things that were, quote, essential. But because we had some should do's and nice to do's, we were able to cut things that were not mission critical, as we often say, and give us the margin to cut that $1 million out of the budget. Significant items tend to be disproportionately distributed in a given group. The management takeaway is that you should focus on the 20%. You don't ignore the 80%, but you focus on the 20%. If you've got 20% of your leaders in a particular area of ministry who are the most motivated, who are the most involved, who are the most committed, who are going to produce the most results for that ministry, you want to, quote, feed the lion, so to speak. You want to invest in them, you want to encourage them, you want to continue to benefit from having them and keeping them involved. One of the illustrations we give here is that, Jesus, he didn't ignore the crowds. He taught the crowds, he spoke to the crowds, but there were times when he pulled away from the crowds and he focused on what? The 12.
12, actually 3, if you think about it.
And more specifically, even 3, 20% of the 12,
Yeah.
he actually focused on, yeah.